Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. What do you get when you combine more than 10 years of talk radio experience with a conservative Christian historical constitutionalist who has an unbridled opinion, rapier wit, and a gift for the uncommon and little-known historical facts about America? I can only describe one person. He's not only a friend of many years, host of heartofamerica.net, and the author of Unknown America, Myths and Little-Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth. Michael Hart appears regularly here on the third Monday of every month at 10 a.m. You can follow him at michaelhartshow.com. My dear old friend, Michael Hart, welcome to your edition of Revealing the Truth.
Thank you for having me, Rabbi.
It's great to have you. We're very excited that you will be part of our May release of our new Apple TV, Roku TV, what else? Amazon Fire. You'll be on iHeartRadio. You'll be on the TuneIn Radio app through us. You'll be on Spotify through us. You'll have your own channel, sub-channel on Roku, Amazon TV, Amazon Fire, and as well as the new Apple app and the new Android app, all in development right now, getting ready for release in May. We're expanding to reach 194 million new users, and you will have the Michael Hart channel on every one of our sub-channels for every one of our feeds. Right. So we're taking you to the globe, my friend.
Well, I'll be happy to tag along, Rabbi, and I appreciate all the support. You've been a great friend over the years. You do wonderful work.
I appreciate that very much. Michael, we are in what some say is an unprecedented time in our history. You, who are an expert in the unknown America, is that really true? Are we in an unprecedented time in American history?
I think we are in a period of time in our history, Rabbi, where it's unprecedented in the sense of the extent to which it's gone. There has been attempts at socialism and liberalism multiple times throughout the course of our history. You know, we talk all the time about things like the New World Order. There's nothing new about the New World Order. We saw this as, the last iteration of it, probably under Woodrow Wilson. But the left has always been attempting to move things back to a socialist platform. That's always where they've wanted to be. What is unprecedented is the fact that they have been so aggressive in this attempt under the guise, very stealthily speaking, the guise of the coronavirus pandemic, which no one's going to argue is deadly. It's obviously very infectious and contagious, but it's not the threat the Democrats are exploiting it to be. So in that sense, yes, we are in a very unique, unprecedented time in that regard.
Some would say that the government is in a position of overreach, that this shelter at home, I grew up in the time of polio. We didn't stay home when polio was around. I grew up in a time of scarlet fever, and we didn't stay home when scarlet fever was around. Two major, in my lifetime, flu epidemics in the 50s and the 60s that we didn't stay home, and I didn't die. I didn't get polio. I didn't get scarlet fever.
Right.
68 years old. I've never had a flu shot. I've never had the flu of any kind whatsoever, nor has my 93-year-old mother. Now, she gets the flu shot. She's never had the flu. I've never had a flu shot, and I've never had the flu. Is this a government outreach, or is there something to the fact that historically we haven't had anything about shelter at home or social distancing? We actually built up our immune system by being exposed to various viruses that were in the environment. Mm-hmm. The Bible calls it pestilence. And actually, if you look up the definition of pestilence, it is viral. Most people think of pestilence, they think about the locust plague. That's a plague. Biblically, a plague is different than a pestilence. Although pestilence can be a plague is something that's unique. Pestilence is defined in all the dictionaries, whether or not it be Webster's, Oxford, or the biblical dictionaries, is a contagion that is spread throughout the earth.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. For one thing, people need to realize that from a health perspective, our bodies are fighting off viruses virtually every day of the week. We're exposed to bacteria continually. And you're right, there is the herd immunity aspect of it. Like you, I haven't had a flu shot in 4 or 5 years. And knock on wood, I haven't had the flu during that time either, because I didn't like the way the shot itself made me feel. And I've been self-isolating here and washing my hands, but I do those things normally during the season anyway. As you're well aware, I broadcast from a radio station, although I'm at my home studio today. Radio stations are as filthy as daycares are, Rabbi, so I'm constantly spraying Lysol and things of that nature around the studio. But the thing about it is that we have this lack of immunity where this thing is concerned, because what's also quite fascinating is the last time I looked, the coronavirus death numbers as reported, and I emphasize that, as reported, are around 39,000. According from the Center for Disease Control, we're past 60,000 on just the regular old boring flu. But yeah, we have a vaccination for that, which is the justification for staying home with all these stay-at-home orders. Is it a government overreach? It absolutely is. You look at places like Michigan with Gretchen Whitmer. You can not go to church. If you go to a Target store, you have to buy food. You can't go over here and get batteries. You can't go over here and buy a fire stick or whatever for your TV set. Literally, you can't buy seeds. They have police caution tape in front of the non-essential areas. But you can buy marijuana. You can buy liquor. You can go out on your boat, but you can't go out on a jet ski. In what world does that make any sense? It doesn't. It's a matter of government overreach. And then she comes out a couple of days ago and says that her response is one of the most conservative responses in the country. You have a lot of people, these little homeowners association type fiefdoms, we're calling them states, that have popped up across this country, as well as some of the counties and cities, where you have these heavy-handed approaches. I mean, again, you can't go to church, but I can get a bottle of Jim Beam. I mean, that's absolutely insane. It's overreach of the highest order, and that actually is the unprecedented part to this particular issue.
So going back in our constitutional history, when the crafters of the Constitution put together the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the amendments to the Constitution that have been passed over the years by a majority, 75% of the states, ratifying that to become the ability to amend the Constitution. State rights and executive office, the president's rights, under a state of emergency seem to be in conflict. It seems that the Constitution grants the president a certain amount of control over the states under emergency, state of emergency declaration, or quote unquote national defense or national security issues. Patriot Act, things like that we exhibited or experienced after 9/11. Right. This was controlled by the Department of Homeland Security over state operations. So we now have this emergency declaration, and there seems to be a certain amount of rebellion to what the president's powers are. Now, Jenna Ellis has been a guest on this program before. She is now a legal advisor to the White House. We've known Jay Sekulow in the Sekulow family. I've known him for over 25 years. They're saying that he's well within his rights to do this, but there seems to be a certain amount of friction, if you will, between the governors who say that they have authority over the municipalities, that the mayors of each one of the cities are under the auspices of the governor, and that the governor is under whose authority? Who does the governor report to? Who's the oversight of the governor? Is it the state house, the state Congress that has authority over the governor? They're a legislative body. They're not an executive branch body. So who is the executive branch authority if the governor is the executive branch of the state?
Right.
Does that fall under the rising hierarchy of federal oversight in the executive branch? Are they considered to be a part of the executive branch of the United States government?
Well, a lot of that is going to vary on people's interpretation of the Constitution. And interestingly enough, there's also a geographical aspect to it. If you look at the New England states, for example, we'll take New York and the response of Cuomo. As one of the original colonies, they very much understood their sovereignty as it relates to the United States, whereas California would not, because, of course, they came along much later on. And then you have states like Oklahoma that don't even become a state until like 1907. So you've got the geographical aspect to that. The governors themselves they are not bound, constitutionally speaking, to adhere to the demands of the White House in this sense. The president does not have the authority to level a widespread state-to-state quarantine. The governors have to comply. However, holding the purse strings under a situation where it's declared emergency, the federal government could absolutely withhold funds. There's also the optic aspect of this is, if the president's saying we've got a problem here, or the representatives or whatever, and as the governor, I don't comply with their advice and consent, and there does become an escalated death count, how does that fare well for my political future? So they're all pretty much following in lockstep. They are communicating via conference calls pretty much every day. But the House of Representatives, can only overrule the governors in the respective states if they sue the governors. And that's going to be a suit within Congress, not a suit within the court system. So it's a pretty complex thing. But states, and the interesting thing about this is 6-7 months ago, the Democrats were screaming about the supremacy clause of the federal government being able to run roughshod over all the states. The states have to fall in line. Now, all of a sudden, that Trump is laying down these mandates and these orders and referring to the states, that they have to listen to him. That all of a sudden you got the left, led by Pelosi, screaming states' rights. All of a sudden, it's one or the other, constitutionally speaking. So this is one of those arguments or one of those questions that's really almost unanswerable. It almost have to be a Supreme Court issue. But at the end of the day, the United States government can't force a state to do anything without having some kind of a suit involved, which, by the way, is how we got the legalization of homosexual marriage. It cannot come down by fiat, executive order, or mandate.
It's interesting that you mentioned the colonies. We have 3 distinct states that aren't really states. They are commonwealths.
Right.
You have the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And these 3 commonwealths operate under Commonwealth law, which is distinctly different from a tort perspective. From my sister was a Pennsylvania attorney, retired after 45 years. And had to be an expert in Commonwealth law because the state of Pennsylvania is a Commonwealth operating differently. And when we look at Virginia, there have been a lot of parodies out about this governor in Virginia. There was one on Babylon Bee, which is a satire site about making Christians wear a yellow cross. Well, of course, as a Jew, I look at that as the yellow star that we were forced to wear in the ghettos of Nazi Germany under the rule of the Hitler regime, and the telling either the state or the federal government telling churches. Now, you and I both know that the only statement that exists as far as the separation of church and state is concerned, defined by the Constitution, is a singular statement that said that there shall be no state religion. That is the category under which the separation of church and state exists, is that the federal government cannot mandate. I had the opportunity several years ago to meet at a church with he considered himself to be a contemporary Muslim that helped craft the Constitution of Tunisia. And he said Tunisia is the first democratic Muslim country in the world. And I asked to see a copy of the Constitution. So he handed it to me, and the first line of the Constitution says, this is the Constitution, the democratic Constitution adopted by the people of Tunisia, and the state religion shall be Islam. And I said to him, that disqualifies you from meeting the primary condition of a democracy, which is the freedom of religion. So when you create a state religion, you have transcended, you've crossed the line into legislating the faith component. So the 501c3 nonprofit church and synagogues, under the IRS regulations, under the laws of incorporation, are granted independence from oversight by the federal government into the financial affairs. If you're a 501c3 nonprofit, non-church synagogue, you have to file a 990 tax return just to report, but it's still tax deductible, and still they just file it away. I don't know what they do with it, but you really can operate as an independent 501c3 without having to register with the federal government. That is the right of every nonprofit. When you incorporate it, like here in Alabama, we're incorporated as an Alabama nonprofit, which automatically recognizes us under federal authority, but we're also registered as a 501c3 so that we would get the designation so that 100% of the contributions to our ministry are tax deductible. There are other nonprofit ministries where you might receive a gift in kind, or you might receive some other, for instance, Goodwill. You donate clothing, you put the value on the clothing, they don't put the value on the clothing. But in our case, we are strictly cash contribution. Even our subscriptions, which are simply access to information, is tax deductible. How do they get to determine, for example, the citations that were issued in, I believe, Mississippi for a gathering at a drive-in theater where the cars were, people were in their cars, and each person was fined $500 for unlawful assembly under the mandate to shelter at home and no gatherings of more than whatever the number was at that time, 5 people, 10 people, what have you. How does that wash from a legal and governmental? Under what constitution, whether state or federal constitution, do they have the right to legislate free assembly?
This is where the word vague plays such a significant role, because a lot of these citations are being issued under no trespassing orders, whereas others are completely arbitrary under the force of threat. And so there is no justification for this. There is no provision for outside of loitering or trespassing laws that would allow them the ability to write these citations. At the end of the day, the church, as it relates to the individual building and the individual congregation, is in fact a business from the perspective of the right to enter the facility itself. In addition to that, the idea was to be socially distant at 6 feet, and now we have some people that are getting cited for being in their cars in the same parking lot. But the thing is it's the threat of it. If we do it one time, we might not have to do it a second time. I'm going to think that a lot of these citations are going to be forgiven, but the order, see, the thing about it is it's the citation is one thing, Rabbi. It's the willingness and the desire to do it. If you were the most devout atheist in the world, you should be terrified of the attack on the church right now, because it's an attack on every aspect of civil liberty. And, the founding fathers, it's one of the most confusing aspects of our history. When you go back to the colonial times, people don't understand that, for example, pastors' salaries were tied to things like the value of a tobacco crop any given year. There's a case out there called the Parsons Cause, talking about how pastors would be paid. In the early days in the colonies, you were forced to tithe to the church. It was a part of your participation in that community. When we get to the Constitutional Convention era, the founding fathers were like, no, none of this is going to happen. This is ridiculous. There needs to be a clear delineation. You answer this question for me. Why are we closing churches or access to them, but in a lot of cases, mosques are still open? And so, because there's, the political aspect of that as well. There's nothing legal about it. There's nothing even health oriented about it. It's an opportunity for an opportunistic politician to flex some muscle over the masses, and the great unwashed are falling for it because they're so fearful. A moment ago, you mentioned also Hitler. How does Hitler come to rise in power? He comes to rise because of the reparations placed on Germany after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. People were scared, they were broke, they were hungry, they were tired, they wanted new leadership, they wanted to try something different. And this was what gets us a fascist Germany and the rise of the little Austrian corporal, and then we know how that ended up. So this is what happens. Political parties instill fear. They feign towards some type of militaristic response to embolden that fear. People get tired of it and weary of it, and they capitulate. It's really no more complex than that.
There's those that say that there is the hive ability to build up immunities because we're exposed. You have medical information coming out from people like Bill Gates, who has no medical training whatsoever, that's looking to invest and make money and insinuate himself into a leadership role in this particular issue that also is tied in with implants and with RFID and for other ways of tracking people.
Surveillance state.
Surveillance. Hidden within the agenda of the left, in order to institute many of the socialistic-based policies, they need to have a complete knowledge as to where you are, what you are doing, and what benefits you're receiving in order to make it so that everyone is treated the same. Now, I have experience with spending time in Ukraine when, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, Ukraine had a independent, non-party new president, new government, and after 3 years into it, they were kind of like we were in the wilderness, saying, hold on a second, we liked it back in Egypt. We were taken care of back in Egypt. This economy that you're bringing in that says that I have to work to get paid and that I have to go out and find a job, and I'm not receiving government cheese and government bread and government subsidies. And now there is a hierarchy within society, and the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and the middle section seems to be doing okay. It's the two extreme ends. Well, that's the way it is in the Palestinian regime of Fatah and Hamas and Gaza, is that the leadership is wealthy and living in mansions and the people are suffering. The agenda that's being promoted as a response, if you will, as to almost a commentary on how this administration is responding to this virus, the economic impact of this virus, the economic impact of the policies, the timing in which there was a response to it, and what the level of response was, is that will this be a referendum in November on the handling of Washington, on whether or not we're going to wind up under a Biden administration with a majority House Democrats, majority Senate Democrats, and these policies of absorbing hundreds of millions of illegal aliens, of making it where people's income levels are being managed. There's a national health care system, and there's data collection that infringes upon my ability to be an independent citizen of this republic. It's no longer a republic, it's now a socialist regime that comes in that tries to make everybody the same.
It is definitely the plans of the Democrats to do just that. Nancy Pelosi gave Donald Trump an F yesterday in the political talk shows over his response. I don't know what his response should have looked like. Back in January, after he had a travel ban on China, she goes on TV and starts screaming from Chinatown in San Francisco. I was there the same time, Rabbi, we spoke. And she's screaming that people need to come to Chinatown, come to Chinatown. Trump is he's perpetrating a hoax over here. Now, all of a sudden, she's saying that Donald Trump has been saying it was a hoax all along and we should have closed the borders down early. It doesn't matter what direction he goes. They're going to exploit it by simply changing the subject or changing their tune. She's now accusing Donald Trump of saying things she herself had said. The Democrats, however, rely on something. They rely on naivete, they rely on fear, gullibility, and a lack of information in the low information voter. We know this. It's been a long standard of theirs for many, many, many years, because too many people don't pay attention to what I do, what people like you do. They get their news from Yahoo or Facebook or whatever, and then they go and watch out and see what guy's going to get a rose this week on The Bachelor or whatever the case may be. It is the plan. I interviewed a woman today by the name of Cheryl Chumley from the Washington Times, wrote a wonderful piece that appeared on the Alinsky tactics that are being utilized right now. And it is fear, it's intimidation, it's work from the inside for the common good. And even Gretchen Whitmer a couple of days ago said that it was her responsibility as a governor to keep people safe and mitigate them from risk. Risk of what? Risk of capitalism? Keep people safe from what? Keep people safe from managing their own finances or raising their own family? It's a management ploy. Donald Trump will most likely win in November, but Biden is definitely going to gain a lot of momentum and a lot of attention. But the ultimate outcome of this is even more concerning, is the fact that they're willing to try it in the first place. If they don't succeed this time, there will be another attempt, and there'll be attempts after Trump as well.
Well, historically, we know that after 8 years of a particular party being in the White House, it usually changes the party affiliation. This is why we have to look past. We have to look to the 2018. The November elections this year, 2020. But 2024 is also in consideration, as well as the midterm elections of 2022.
That's exactly right.
That we have to focus on those that are willing to take a firm stand on a. It's no longer constitutional conservatism. It is anti-socialism is almost the agenda, that the position that has to be taken, because Americans don't learn. We have this mentality that it can't happen here.
That's exactly right.
We're not Venezuela. We're not Cuba.
Exactly right.
We're different. We're somehow uniquely different, that whatever happens in other places can't happen here. Well, that was the too big to fall concept behind the brokerage houses, behind Wall Street's collapse. Too big to fall. Lehman Brothers. Too big. Can't happen here. Although the International Bank of Credit and Commerce under the Carter administration failed, miserably failed, under the control of Jake Butcher and C.H. Butcher in Knoxville, Tennessee, that had the affiliation under Burt Lance, the Office of Management and Budget. With the fall of the Shah, we saw the collapse of a financial marketplace that people forget about happened under the Carter administration, that sent this country to, the prime interest rate was 18%.
That's right.
Today it's zero. Okay, under that administration, because of the failure, went to 18%. I owned a manufacturing company at the time. I was paying prime plus 3% to borrow money, 21%. When the average gross profit of a business is 28%, I was paying 21% interest, meaning my gross profit was 7% gross profit. Out of that, I had to pay my people. Out of that, right. And of course, what happened? 2 years. Our motto became, we lose a little on every deal, but we're going to make it up in volume. We were out of business in 2 years. People have very short memories in America because of this American pride, this independence, that we know better than the failed regimes of Hugo Chavez, of the failed regimes of Fidel Castro, the failed regimes of ask yourself, why did Israel change from when the British Mandate came? They came out of independence with a socialistic foundational structure where people in the agricultural communities or in the hospitality industries came out with what they called kibbutzes. This was right. Community living. Everybody shared equally, regardless of your role as to whether or not you were the executive or you were the janitor. You lived on the property, you raised your family on the property, you were provided with housing, you were provided with medical care, you were provided with an income that was all par, all across. Well, after a period of time, when people began to realize this was not sustainable. Yes, there's a national health system, but you pay into it. And in the case of care, there's a lot of times you wait, like in Canada. You may wait 2 months.
Absolutely.
3 months for an MRI or a CAT scan. Okay? It's only emergency and critical care, and if you have a relationship or you're in a particular echelon, that you're able to get that. They moved to what's called a moshav, which was more capitalistic. You don't have to live on the property. You get paid for the role that you do. That drove them to become competitive. That's where the Ahava, Dead Sea products came out of that model. That's where Teva Pharmaceuticals, the largest generic pharmaceutical manufacturer in the world, came out of that environment of having this competitive edge. Why Microsoft and why Intel moved a lot of their development to Israel, because now people wanted this capitalistic infusion of I can rise to and I can have these think tanks and I can have these incubators to come up with these new ideas. And so they're able to bring something to market much faster in Israel, medically, pharmaceutically, technology-wise. Okay, they're able to come up much faster because they work in smaller units. We have these large corporations with 600,000 employees. Okay, there's only 8 million population of Israel. You're not going to have a company with 600,000 employees.
Right.
It's a different model, okay? And it incentivizes the entrepreneurial spirit and incentivizes the capitalistic spirit, even though it has certain parts of it which are still socialist. So there is a way to combine and to find a balance. It's not an either or, and that's the way it's being presented today. It's either you go this way, which is a completely different direction, or you go this way, the way we are headed, and the way we've been structured. And there actually is a working model that has been really quite successful in stimulating an economy and keeping people coming in. And yes, they have walls, and they have borders, and they have security, and they have a way of protecting their citizenry, because they have what's called a defense force, not a defense department that goes out and fights wars in other countries. They're defending. Their purpose to exist is to defend. Okay? There is no platform for an aggressive action, for a preemptive. There's preemptive response to threats to the domestic tranquility. This was what the militia, the well-armed militia, Second Amendment, was all about in having the citizenry. That's why there's mandatory service in Israel. Is every 18 and 19-year-old boy or girl must serve in the military. Girls 2 years, boys 3 years. They know that from the time they're children. They're raised to have this sense of nationalism to defend the country that provides them with their freedom. We're talking with Michael Hart, author of Unknown America, Myths and Little Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth. I know that people are pressuring you for the second edition, the new release, and people have heard all your excuses for why it's not out, and not having the time. I would encourage you to take the time, because this is a treasure trove. This is not only enjoyable reading, but as people are looking for interesting things to understand about our government, our history. Right.
I'll defend myself, though. The children's book is done.
All right.
So it's going off to the publisher right now. So I have been working a little bit.
Okay, good.
Although the challenge has been laid down.
Good. Well, we is it in almost comic style?
It's a lot lighter.
Okay.
You know, a bigger font, a few graphics. The idea was to tone it down a little bit. There's some things in the Unknown America 8-year-olds aren't ready to know yet, so I had to soften some of the blows, so to speak.
I certainly understand. We're going to take a short break with Michael Hart, just for a couple of announcements, and when we come back, we're going to continue this discussion about Constitution, the overreach, what's going on in the nation that you need to be aware of, and answer the questions of, should we go back to business as usual and let nature take its course? We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color. and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Michael Hart, author of Unknown America, Myths and Little Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth, a conservative constitutionalist who knows our history. He's on a par with any of the great people you see being interviewed. Cheryl Chumley was a featured guest here for 2 years. Back to her WND days when we were a WND TV partner. Great to have you back, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
I notice that people are asking you when they tune into the Michael Hart Show, they can watch it online, they can get it through the TuneIn Radio app, they can get it through your podcast, they can find you on really michaelhartshow.com will lead you into being able to interact with you on your Facebook page and ask you questions. People are asking you, should we stay quarantined? Okay. Should we continue to operate as easing back into, are we in this cycle that the Israeli scientists say is a 70-day viral cycle? At the end of 70 days, it basically peters out, is what they're saying. And so they today began reopening businesses on a staggered basis in Israel. Right. And they were the first to close their border.
I don't think we have a choice, Rabbi. You know, the funny thing about it is that you've got people making decisions, closing the restaurants and the gatherings or whatnot, whether it's the Pelosi's of the world or Shift or Falsey or whatever. People that are making these decisions to shut things down, they're not affected by these decisions. And when you have, because their checks are clearing, they're sequestered wherever they are behind their big vaulted doors and their gated communities. And when you have people that are not affected by the outcome of a decision that you have to live with, but that they don't, that's a very dangerous place to be. Now, I'm all for social distancing. I do that naturally during flu season anyway. I'm a chronic hand washer anyway. I'm not a germaphobe, but we have destroyed major segments of this economy. A lot of these restaurants and bars and taverns and whatnot will never come back. Gyms are closing en masse. Interestingly enough, I mean, you think about this, because this is one of those unintended consequences of the idiocracy of the left. How many of the people in the Democrat Party are so desirous to see minimum wage go to $15 an hour, primarily for service and or food industry employees? Well, if we cut the occupancy rate of restaurants in half, which is what they're talking about doing in the short term, We lessen the ability of these businesses to survive if they're forced into a $15 an hour minimum wage scenario. The money simply is not there, kind of like back to the company you talked about owning. So there's all these unintended consequences, and then you start to filter in things like geography. Here in Birmingham, Alabama, actually the state of Alabama, we learned a day or so ago that some of the numbers were not as high as we had been led to believe. In the last 2 weeks, my former father-in-law died of coronavirus as the official cause of death. He died in Georgia. The interesting thing about that is he was only given a period of time to live anyway because he had leukemia. He has leukemia side effects, goes to the hospital, this doctor. He's in advanced stages of it, catches pneumonia. They find that he had coronavirus. The cause of death is coronavirus, where he was given a matter of weeks to live anyway. So those numbers are inflated. And so people are becoming very suspicious of this, and they're becoming very restless of it. And I had a psychiatrist on with me about a week ago. The medical health community is concerned about the potential number of suicides, depression issues, mental health issues that can lead to other diseases might surpass the casualty numbers of the coronavirus itself. The whole thing should have been responded to, but it was time to go back to work. If you want to do it piecemeal, wear our masks, whatever. But something else, and Shirley brought this up today, and I'll be brief. There's the people that are not paying any attention to what's going on. There's the mask wearers out there that are terrified of it. And then there are the people that are wearing the mask that are going along to get along because they don't want to get the leers and the jeers from those neighbors that are giving them the evil eye because they're out and about not wearing a mask. So you have an aspect of the population that is, again, capitulated to the fear out of fear of backlash against themselves, not dissimilar from wearing a MAGA hat or anything red in public for that matter. We don't have a choice but to go back to work. You're going to eat. I'm going to eat. There are people out there that don't know where their next meal's coming from, and those people, we don't have the money to sustain that very long, indefinitely. A big part of the Chinese, desire is to move the dollar out of the way of being the world's reserve currency to the yuan. Dear God, if that happens, the money to fund these stimulus evaporates almost overnight. Going back to work is not the option, it's the only option.
You bring up China, and there's no question that this originated from China. The work that I did and the research that I did on the CODIST, when I looked into the weaponization of DNA, I looked into virology as another way of, I was going to go down one path, and it was virology, but then I went down the path of DNA because that's much more finite and specific and led more to the plot line. But I looked into this whole concept of studying viruses and the containment of viruses in a laboratory. China owns a great deal of real estate in the United States, a great deal of real estate in the United States. I don't think that we know the staggering amount of investment that China has in American real estate. We don't know, based on numbers, how much the Vatican owns of American real estate. Every Catholic church's property comes under the purview of the Vatican. There are two entities which are the two wealthiest real estate owners in the world, and that is the Vatican and China. Now, if this were Iran, we would be seizing the assets of Iranian properties owned in America, part of the sanctions. Should we preemptively seize the properties and freeze the assets of China? Would that not send a signal that until this is resolved, we have enough information to believe, enough intelligence to believe that this initiated from a lab and was out of either released or got out, that we should not put into place certain protections for America, because these are tangible assets. This is currency in banks. This is something that could fund our government by, now, would it be a declaration of war? Is China actually going to go to war against America? Is that part of an economic strategy? Every war that I can remember had an economic component
Absolutely.
to it.
Absolutely.
It was always follow the money. I grew up Korea, the Korean War, leading into Vietnam. Okay, it was the French. Okay, we bailed out France in Vietnam. We bailed out France in World War II. If it wasn't for America, the national language of France would be German.
Right.
Should we be seizing, at least freezing, the assets as a sign to the American people that the federal government not only recognizes that China is in some way responsible? We don't need the hard evidence to go to court to prove Socratically under our legal system that they're involved. We know they're involved. Should we institute the freezing of Chinese assets in America, right, for the purpose of liquidating those assets to refund an economy devastated by something that initiated in China?
It's an interesting thought, interesting concept. I think we have to dissect intent here. You know, we know that they intentionally lied about the numbers. We don't necessarily know that they intentionally, created the virus. It doesn't appear that it was any kind of a bioweapon or anything of that nature. But, we do know that they, of course, did lie about it, and they actually put their numbers down when we should have been warned even earlier. I think there needs to be some kind of restitution. I don't disagree with that. I wouldn't want to risk the possibility of war, which I don't see happen, because you're right. The War of 1812 was the British trying to bring us back in under British banking laws, and every war does have that economic component to it. But I don't necessarily know what the compensation aspect of it, if it's a matter of taking a case to them in the world court and suing them for the $2 trillion we've got invested in this. It starts to get into the geopolitical aspect of what is their ultimate goal. Now, last week, I had an interesting conversation with former AG Jeff Sessions on this program, my program, and asked him a question about a military response. And his whole idea was, China has this plan, their 100-year anniversary of assimilating their power and becoming the world's dominant power. This 100 years, and I forgot what it attaches to 100 years ago, but it has to do with some kind of revolution or reformation in China. He's more concerned about that intent than this event, if that makes any sense. So if there was going to be a justification for the freezing or the forfeiture of assets from China, I think it should be more along the lines of staving off what the long-term game plan is from the Chinese, as opposed to this one particular event that we don't have all the details over yet. That's my opinion. I'm not an expert in the relations of this, the geopolitical relations of this, but certainly something should be done to help compensate the tens of millions of Americans for a loss that, in my opinion, did not have to happen.
I completely agree with you. We've been talking with Michael Hart, host of The Michael Hart Show. You can find him at michaelhartshow.com. He's the author of Unknown America, Myths and Little-Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth. A lot of you are out there reading novels, and certainly I encourage you to read The Codist, which is the novel that I wrote, a biblical thriller. But you should also use this time to educate and inform, and especially during the time when your kids are at home. You could take one of these unknown facts a day or a week, and activities surrounding getting a map and showing your kids where these locations are and what took place in our American history. I know that growing up in an Eastern European home, that history was very important to me, of southern Poland and western Ukraine, and even as an adult went to do all of the family research because of what I experienced in my youth growing up as a first post-Holocaust generation. So it's important. It's interesting, these myths and little-known facts, but it's also extremely educational, and highly recommend it. Michael Hart, always great to see you. Give TC my love and our condolences on her dad.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, God bless you, my friend. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.